Yesterday, Chief U.S. District Judge James Boseberg of D.C. said that he is going to be launching official proceedings to determine whether or not members of the Trump administration defied his order not to deport the Venezuelan migrants from the country using the Wartime Alien Enemies Act. Again, that's only been invoked 3 times before this, and all 3 were in wartime. The Trump administration is, Boseberg says that they likely were in contempt and should face criminal contempt charges. But he's given the Trump administration 1 week to respond. It's a 46-page order where he outlines how the Trump administration defied this court order to turn the planes around. And I just want to read a little bit of the beginning memorandum part. Here is how he summarizes it. On the evening of Saturday, March 15th, 2025, this court issued a written temporary restraining order barring the government from transferring certain individuals into foreign custody pursuant to the Alien Enemies Act. At the time the order issued, those individuals were on planes being flown overseas, having been spirited out of the United States by the government before they could vindicate their due process rights by contesting their removability in federal court as the law requires. Rather than comply with the court's order, the government continued the hurried removal operation. Early on Sunday morning, hours after the order issued, it transferred 2 plane loads of passengers protected by the TRO into a Salvadoran mega prison. TRO means temporary restraining order. And that's what the Trump administration was in violation of, according to Boseberg, and also just common sense. As this opinion will detail, the court ultimately determines that the government's actions on that day demonstrate a willful disregard for its order sufficient for the court to conclude that probable cause exists to find the government in criminal contempt. He's not even saying civil contempt here, criminal contempt. The court does not reach such a conclusion lightly or hastily. Indeed, it has given defendants ample opportunity to rectify or explain their actions. None of their responses has been satisfactory. One might nonetheless ask how this inquiry into compliance is able to proceed at all, given that the Supreme Court vacated the TRO after the events in question. Now, that is on a technicality, just to say that here. It's because it had expired at that time. The court's later determination that the TRO suffered from a legal deficit, however, does not excuse the government's violation. Instead, it is a foundational legal precept that every judicial order must be obeyed, no matter how erroneous it may be, until a court reverses it. If a party chooses to disobey the order, rather than wait for it to be reversed through the judicial process, such disobedience is punishable as contempt, notwithstanding any later revealed deficiencies in the order. This is common sense here. I think that gives a good summary of that plank of his argument, which basically says that judicial rulings still have to be abided by, even if you disagree with their contents, even if you plan on charging them later on, or appealing, I should say. Even if you think that this judicial ruling is completely without legal merit, your lawyer may think that, but how are those determinations made? In a court of law. So they could have appealed this, but they still had to abide by the order. That is foundational to the rule of law in this country, that just because you dislike an order doesn't mean that you get to completely disregard it. But the
post memes on Twitter about it.
Right. But then that begs the question also, like, what happens if they defy an order? Because this would be, I believe, sent to the Department of Justice if there is some sort of Boseberg actually follows through with criminal contempt. And then Pam Bondi's just not going to take up the case. And then we're compounding this constitutional crisis. So there's many different ways that this can go. But there's something smart also that Boseberg did in this, is that he said that he would forego criminal contempt proceedings if they begin the process of due process for the folks that were sent to CCOP. So he's essentially giving them a week to say, like, I can go forward with criminal contempt, or you can bring these folks back to the United States so they can have due process. And I'm not even saying that you can't deport them, but there needs to be a process in front of an immigration court or whatever. But if they were to take that lifeline that Boseberg is essentially providing for them, they would have to acknowledge that they have the capacity to bring these individuals back, meaning that they have custody over them, which is a really tricky legal bind for them to be in because they've been denying that they have authority over them altogether, including Abrego Garcia. So it's a bit of a pickle for them, although they still have the ace up their sleeve in the fact that they don't seem to be interested in complying with the courts whatsoever. And then we reach full-blown constitutional crisis mode, although I already think we're there.
I mean, the courts have to start finding and putting penalties toward like DOJ on this. That's simply where it needs to go.
Exactly. The Department of Justice is acting in Donald Trump's interests and not even with a sliver of the pretense of independence. But here is Senator Chris Van Hollen in El Salvador. He held a press conference, and as I mentioned, he was unable to see Abrego Garcia, who is of Maryland, so this is his constituent. This is this press conference where he speaks about how Trump is clearly in violation of this order.
The Trump administration is clearly in violation of American court orders.
Así que claramente la administración de los Estados Unidos está en cumplimiento con las órdenes de las Cortes de los Estados Unidos.
That still leaves the question, why is the government of El Salvador continuing to imprison a man where they have no evidence he's committed any crime and they've not been provided any evidence from the United States that he's committed a crime?
Y entonces la pregunta que resta por preguntar es por qué entonces el gobierno de El Salvador no libera al señor Abrego García cuando no hay pruebas que lo incriminen en un delito.
Just to say, this is just a translation of what he just said, so
right.
Just so people aren't thinking they're missing anything.
So they should just let him go.
Entonces deberían liberarlo, dejarlo ir.
And they should let him go, and we will find a way to get him from San Salvador to Maryland, the state of Maryland.
All right, so let's just pause it here. There was another part of that press conference, I believe, or maybe he had said it at another point, where Van Hollen revealed that El Salvador's vice president told him that they are keeping Abrego Garcia locked up because the United States is paying the government of El Salvador to do so, which is something that is a really key piece of evidence in this case, because once again, this undercuts the government's argument that they have no control over this. Here is this part. Thanks, Matt, for finding it.
Some of them have severe disabilities.
Algunos de ellos con
kids.
algunos problemas fisiológicos.
I promised them that I would do everything I could to get him out of CECOT.
Y yo les prometí a ellos que iba a hacer todo lo que estuviera en mis manos para sacarlos del CECOT.
And I won't stop trying, and I can assure the president, the vice president, that I may be the first United States senator to visit El Salvador on this issue, but there will be more, and there will be more members of Congress coming.
So that's him referencing the vice president there.
Gotcha. Right. Yeah. So they did have that conversation, and it's just making it more and more clear that these folks are lying and trying to give both the United States courts the runaround and the family of Abrego Garcia the runaround. And we don't know what happened to him. We are in worst case scenario territory here. And of course, it's not just him. There are hundreds of other people, and an overwhelming majority of these folks have not been convicted or charged with a serious crime or a crime at all. Many of them just have civil violations. And even if they all had charges against them, that does not allow for the government to deport them without due process, without the evidence being presented in court. That is why we have a system, a legal system in this country that Trump is testing the bounds of as we speak in a very perilous manner.
Yeah, it's important to underline what you say. It's not just Kilmar Abrego Garcia or even the names of other people you've seen profiled. There are people who have been detained who don't want their identities publicized because they fear, obviously, retribution within CCOT.
If people have not seen yet the images out of those prisons, we didn't really show them because they also serve, I think, propaganda for the government of El Salvador and for the Trump administration as fascist propaganda, showing how cruel and inhumane the conditions are. But you see that it looks like a Nazi concentration camp. I mean, their heads are shaved. The men are packed in together like sardines. They sleep on these towering steel bunk beds, close, right next to one another, no blankets, no pillows. They're not allowed to speak. The lights are on all day. They can't go outside. They can't speak to a lawyer. They can't speak to loved ones and family members. And there's real deep concern that many of these folks may be dead, because there have been hundreds of deaths at CCOT since it opened at the start of 2023. And the level of obfuscation by this administration can't just
they're not rehabilitating people.
Yeah, well, what are they going to do? They're torturing them. It's a torture dungeon. Exactly. That's what it is. That's what it is. Just by looking at the conditions, you can tell it's a torture dungeon. And the best case scenario that we're at right now is that the administration is defying this because they see any capitulation as weakness, and that these men that are housed there are still in prison there that are still alive. But we have to begin wondering about that second scenario, because it's becoming more and more likely the longer this goes on.
Hey folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.